Welcome to Salad with a Side of Fries. I'm your host, Jen Trepic, talking wellness and weight loss for real life. We're here to clear up the myths, misinformation, bad science, and marketing to teach you how to eat and how to cheat. Are you ready? I'm having salad with a side of fries. This week is called Cool Your Rice. Now, it's funny because I had somebody ask me if this topic was literal or a play on Cool Your Jets. And I will admit, I often go for the play on words, but this one is literal. Literally, cool your rice and your potatoes and some pastas and barley, peas, lentils, beans. So maybe you've seen this on social media or in headlines recently, and it's not news. You know, the original studies on this are not new. And we've even talked about some of these elements before when we've talked about prebiotics, probiotics, and postbiotics. But people messaged me asking if this was true, that it's healthier to cook and then cool your rice before you eat it. So the short answer is yes. And as I just mentioned a minute ago, it's not just for rice. But the other piece is I think it's important to understand why, right? Why is it that this is potentially healthier for us? Now, when we talked about prebiotics and probiotics, we've also talked about fiber before, right? Our episode, America's Fiber Problem, we got into that one. Now, essentially what we want to remember right now is that when we think about carbohydrates or carbs, right? It's not no carb or low carb. It's quality carb. The quality of carbohydrates is a function of their nutrient density and their fiber. We often discuss fiber as a prebiotic, meaning it's the food for healthy gut bugs. Resistant starch is a type of fiber that's a powerful prebiotic. And resistant starch is what's created when that rice goes from warm, like cooked with the heat, to cooling. Like the chemistry of the starches in the rice change. Now, not all starches become resistant starch. Okay, so typically starches break down into glucose and then absorbed into the body, which then increases blood sugar after eating. This is known as postprandial glucose. Resistant starch, though, is sort of like insoluble fiber in that it does not digest. It passes through the small intestine without being broken down by bacteria. Then in the large intestine, it becomes like soluble fiber. So it sort of ferments, creating fuel for the bacteria in the large intestine. So resistant starch feeds the friendly bacteria in the large intestine, which has a positive effect on not just the type of bacteria, but also the number of bacteria. And so this is sort of a sidebar, but it's interesting to me. So most foods that we eat feed only about 10% of our cells. Fermentable fibers and resistant starches feed the other 90% of our cells, right?
Wow.
Yeah. So when the bacteria digest the resistant starch, one of the byproducts is short-chain fatty acids. We've talked about those before, most notably butyrate, right? We talked about butyrate as a postbiotic. So we have this prebiotic and postbiotic situation happening with the gut bugs in the large intestine. Okay, so given the function of resistant starches, research shows us that they may decrease inflammation, may help prevent colon cancer and inflammatory bowel disease, may improve insulin sensitivity and lower postprandial glucose, that blood sugar after we eat. And similarly, just like foods naturally high in fiber, foods with resistant starch can support feelings of fullness and satiety, which then can potentially help us eat less overall. Not that eating less is the objective, right? We still want our nutrition, but especially if what we're consuming are empty calories. Interesting, isn't it?
It is.
Okay, so there are 4 types of resistant starches, and they're classified based on the structure and source of the resistant starch. So type 1 resistant starch is they're physically protected, that resistant starch. So think of like seeds or beans, right? Or even a lot of grains, right? They have this really fibrous cell wall, right? The structure that protects it. Type 2 resistant starches are resistant granules. So think of like your green banana. This is also, by green, I mean unripe bananas, not like plantains. And even raw potatoes are like your type 2. Type 3 resistant starch are formed through a process called retrogradation. So this is that heat and then cooling shifts the molecular structure of the starch. So this is like, again, potatoes, rice, and it happens when it's cooked and then cooled. And then type 4 resistant starches are man-made. These are typically in packaged foods, and you'll see them mostly from brand name and reading the ingredients. So I'm going to give you a few to look for. High maize, crystalline, Novolose, Fiber Sim, and Nutrios. So high maize, as an example, might be in vegan prebiotic shakes or flours. And the label might say like high amylase maize resistant starch. More ingredients for us to look for. So again, if we can choose foods that don't have labels, even better, right? We want to go for the other kinds of resistant starches. And then, of course, just to add to the confusion, like a single food could have more than one type of resistant starch. And by the way, not all resistant starches increase with heat. So like oats and the bananas and plantains lose some of their resistant starch when they're cooked. So really, this whole thing about cooling your rice only applies to those type 3 resistant starches, which is why, right, we're going to cool our rice. Now, we do have a nutrition nugget on rice, and in that nutrition nugget, we talked more about the difference between white rice and brown rice and the cook in 60-second microwave rice versus boil in a bag 10-minute rice versus steamed rice. We want to go for the least processed, which is that steamed rice. It takes a while to cook. And then for that conversion into the resistant starch, we want to cook it, then cool it, and then you can heat it up if you want to have it warm. So there was a study that compared freshly cooked white rice to white rice that was cooked, refrigerated for 24 hours, and then reheated. The rice that was cooked, then cooled, had 2.5 times more resistant starch compared to the freshly cooked rice. And so remember, this also applies to your potatoes and can apply to some of your other foods as well. There was a study that showed cooking the potatoes and then cooling them overnight tripled their resistant starch content.
Wow.
I know. And then the pasta thing sort of depends on what kind of wheat was used in the pasta. So we need a lot more research. But having said that, I don't know that there would be any harm from cooking your pasta, letting it cool, and then heating it to eat. So maybe this makes the case for meal prep? I don't know.
It definitely does.
Yeah. And then again, think of barley, peas, lentils, beans, right? And green bananas as other sources of resistant starches, right? Those other kinds of resistant starch. Generally, rice is a super common staple food around the world, right? And pasta too. So this gives you a little hack to start the year, cool your rice. And even if this wasn't news to you, right, that you heard all this conversation in the news and on social media, now you know why this is the recommendation. And then I'll, conclude by saying, of course, continue to eat a variety of fruits and vegetables for your fiber too. Cindy, any questions or anything to add?
I hadn't heard about this. So this is all great new information for me. So now I'm going to have to think this over. So when my husband's eating those cold leftovers, they're probably better for him than I thought.
And you can heat it up, even after it cools. But yeah, leftovers. Enjoy them.
Definitely.
Awesome. Well, as always, everybody, I'm your host, Jen Trepeck. Connect with me on Instagram or all social media. I'm at Jen Trepeck, JENNTREPECK. Website is asaladwithasideoffries.com. Please send me a message. I want to hear your takeaways, your ideas, your questions, your goals for 2024. And of course, if you haven't already, Shameless plug for our 2024 Resolution Revolution group coaching program that starts in just a couple weeks. Cindy, thank you again for being here and joining me for this one.
Thank you for having me. I've learned a lot.
Oh, good.
And I will cool my rice.
I love it. Of course, if you're not already, join our membership program by going to glow.fm/salad with a side of fries, or just click the link in the show notes. This shows your support for this podcast, this community, but most importantly, it supports your health. You'll get this week's recipe for the egg and a whole peppers with avocado salsa and the article, The Ultimate Guide to Exercise and Metabolic Health. Well, friends, that's it for today's episode of Salad with a Side of Fries. Congratulations for making yourself and your health a priority. Thanks so much for joining us. Be sure to click subscribe or follow on your favorite podcast platform. Share us with a friend, and we'll be back next week. Always remember, you deserve it, and you are worth it. Happy healthy.